So many of you guys have been asking how we did this color grade on this video. There are an awful lot of people requesting that I give you a tutorial on how I color graded this video. So I'm currently working on a new video and this is one of the shots from it. So how I edited it was in Lightroom. Now Lightroom is mainly done for photo editing, however you can, with a bit of difficulty, edit video in there. And so the first thing you want to do is literally just go into Library and drag and drop your video into here. Then what you want to do is double click on it. So I'll show you. If you go into all photos, if you just double click on it, it brings this up. Then what you want to do is scroll along to a part of the video that you want to select to color grade, and then synchronize that color grade to the rest of the entire video. Now with this one it's going to be slightly difficult because I've got some shots from different days. So you can see here there's a shot that's kind of in the evening, it's quite dark, whereas right at the end I've got a really bright sunny shot. So this is going to be a lot more difficult to edit, but we're going to give it a go and I'll show you the workflow that I did for the previous video. Okay, so I'm just going to scrub along here and I'm just going to select this scene here. Now all you do is click on this and then select capture frame. Come back to all photographs and just command click on both of them so you have them both selected, and then go on to develop. Now you'll see it says video is not supported in develop. However, if you come down to the bottom here and you select the photo clip, that one is supported in develop. Now what we're going to do is we are just going to focus on all of these things down here, on color grading this, and then we're going to sync it to the whole video. So what I'm going to do is probably adjust the temperature and tint ever so slightly, not a massive amount, because as I say, a lot of the days are very different. So I'm just going to make it slightly more green and a slightly more orange kind of look. Now I am going to bring down the exposure a touch and then bring up the contrast as well. So it's really important to try and judge your exposure at the beginning. Now as for the highlights, I'm not going to bring them up because I don't want to overblow the highlights at the end of the video, so I'm just going to bring those down a bit, probably not too far. And then the shadows I'm going to bring up quite a bit, maybe almost half the way. As for the whites, just bring those up slightly and the blacks down. These aren't too important, they kind of adjust the vibrance as well. So now we're going to bring down the clarity a bit. I prefer to have a slightly softer feel to my videos. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drop the vibrance ever so slightly and also the saturation ever so slightly. So that's basically the basic tab done. So if you press the backslash you can see the before and the after. So not a lot of difference. Tone curve is really where you get that fade look, which is what a lot of people have been asking me about on the previous video. So what you want to do is just put a few points on your curve. If you're unable to put the points on, make sure you've got this button selected. You may have this curve. You want to be working with this one, it's just a lot easier to work with. So we're going to pull up the blacks and we're also going to crush them ever so slightly, pull it to the right as well. Now the problem is that's quite a dark image, so if we pull it up too high we are going to get an incredibly faded image. Now it all depends on what sort of look you're going for, but I'm probably going to bring it up maybe to about there, add a bit of contrast by pulling that down. You can always add in more points. If you want to get rid of a point, just click it and drag it off and it gets rid of the point. So I'm going to add in a little bit of contrast, probably like that. And now again, as with every single bit of color grading, you can spend hours on the tone curve. Really this is where most of the image comes to life. So I'm just going to bring up the mid-tones ever so slightly and then fade out the whites just by pulling those down like that, probably not so far. So that's the difference that the tone curve has made to the image. Already it's looking quite cool. Now you can, if you want to go into the different channels and change the different colours, so for example you can make it more green by pulling out the reds and the shadows, or you can put a bit more red in. I personally am not going to do that just because there are so many different colours throughout the whole video. I don't really want to spend too much time editing individual colours. Now HSL slider, now you have a choice. If your video is all done in the same day and it's all the kind of same sort of shot, like this for example, if they were all shot like this, so for example we went into here, you can see in this video it was all done in a similar time of day, so it all worked. Now as for this video, as I showed you at the beginning, it does get brighter and change throughout, so I'm not really going to mess around too much with the colours, but basically the idea is if you get the hue slider on the red, you can slide it left or right to change the colours. Now if you look at the heels, the more I bring it to the left, the more pink it gets, the more to the right, the more green it gets. So I'm just going to play around with these ever so slightly. And usually what I aim to do is to go for a teal and orange kind of look. Now the yellows will affect the greens. I don't know why, but the computer recognises the yellows, the green grass being more yellow than it does in the greens. So I'm just going to bring up the greens a bit more, probably about that much. Now as for the aquas and blues, I like to bring them down probably about halfway, not too far, because there is quite a lot of blue later on in the video. And this is going to give me my orange and teal look, the sort of look that you get in lots of cinematic videos. The purples as well also slightly affect the blues, and there's no magentas, but I'm just going to pull those down slightly as well. Now as for the saturation, I'm going to leave the reds as they are. I am however going to come down to the blues and aquas and pull those down. Now you will see that that's not really making a lot of difference to this image, however I know later on I have a lot of blue in the images, so I'm going to pull down the blues saturation quite a bit. As for the greens and yellows, you can either make it really saturated or quite desaturated. I'm going to go for a more desaturated look, so I'm going to bring down the greens quite a bit and possibly just the yellows a touch as well. As for the oranges, I don't want to do too much because that's really the skin tone, and I don't want to mess that up too much. I might bring it up ever so slightly along with the reds just to kind of keep it all balanced on the skin tones. As for the purples and magentas, I'm just going to bring the purples down and leave the magentas as they are. Now, luminance is the brightness of each individual colour. So for example, if I pull up the greens, the grass is going to be really bright, and I can drop it down. So I'm going to pull the greens up slightly, the yellows also ever so slightly, the reds, actually I'm going to leave the yellows where they are, maybe just a tiny bit, the greens a bit less. Now I'm going to leave the reds and oranges because that is the skin colour, and again I don't really want to mess around too much. I might just bring it down a tiny bit in the reds and up a tiny bit in the oranges, but really not doing too much. Now as for the blues and aquas, I'm going to drop those down to about -20-25 and leave the purples and magentas. So on this particular image you can see the HSL slider hasn't really done a whole lot. It's quite subtle, but what we've done is we've just gone in and desaturated the image a bit more. Now split toning, this is where you can add a sort of a colour to the highlights and shadows. So if I were to hold down Alt and move the slider, you can see these are the individual colours. You've got some pretty wacky hues. I usually like to add a sort of tealy blue into my highlights, so maybe somewhere around 200, and then saturation probably no more than 7%, so really you can't see an awful lot of difference. As for the shadows, probably bring the saturation up to about 7 as well. Leave it down on 0 on the hue, so we're adding a bit of pink. You can see we're adding some reddy pink, and I'm going to bring the saturation down to 3. So it's really not made a visible massive amount of difference. As for detail, sharpening I'm just going to bring up to about 16, and noise reduction to about 11. There's really no need. The reason I do noise reduction is because I like my images to be slightly softer. Okay, so just going back, this is a before photo, this is the after the edit that we've done so far. Now you can realise we are making it quite dark, so I'm just going to come back up and I'm going to bring the exposure up probably to about 0.2. Now effects, this is where you can do a vignette. Sometimes I like to, sometimes I don't. It all depends on what sort of images I'm doing. As for the lakes video, I brought it down to probably about -30, -25. Roundness, you can see the roundness, if you hold down Alt, that's the sort of shape you're getting the vignette. I like to have the roundness a bit lower, around -40, and then bring up the feathering to maximum. I also bring up the highlights to maximum, or almost maximum as well. So you can see the vignette has kind of done that. Now I'm going to just back that off ever so slightly on this because I don't think I want too much vignetting on this specific video. Now one thing you can do if you want to make yours look like an old retro film look is you can add grain to your video. So for example we can do 20, we can add up the size to about 50, sort of mess around, play around with the grain. I think it might work in this video, so I'm just going to keep that in. I quite like putting grain in my photos and videos. That's before, that's after. The camera calibration is the final process that we need to mess around with. Now as I said at the beginning, I'm going for the teal and orange colour grade. A lot of people forget this. They forget that they can use this to really just emphasise the colours and change them around a little bit more. Now to do a teal and orange look, you want to bring the blue primary down and you want to bring the red primary up. So you can kind of see already we've got that teal orange effect going on. Now I think I've brought the blues down too far, so I'm going to bring it probably about half and half on both. Now I can also adjust the saturation. Again, I'm going to bring the saturation down ever so slightly on both not by too much. I want it to still be visible so you can see the effect it's made. Quite a large difference, and you'll see that later on in the video how much of difference it makes. I don't want to do too much with the blues because I know this is going to make the blues very green, and I've done it a lot with the HSL slider as well. So once you've done all that, that is our image fully color graded. Now all you want to do now is take what you've done on here, all of the color grades and everything, and you want to just sync it onto your file that you imported earlier, which is your video file. So one thing you can do before that, if you decide you really like this color grading, you don't want to lose it, is come up here to the presets and click on plus and just add a preset. So for example, we'll call this cinematic video, something like that. Then all you need to do is click create and it adds it down here. So if you ever do another video, all you need to do is come along and click on that and then do the last final adjustments. Okay, so I think we're basically done here. I'm going to click on sync and then just make sure all the boxes are ticked that we want to synchronize, and then press synchronize. This will only take a second, and then what we do is we come onto the videos, double click on the video thing here, and this is the sort of color we're working with at the moment. It's quite dark, but I think it's all right at the moment. That's all fine. It's also looking very brown as well. That's the sort of effect we get. Now that is still really quite saturated on the oranges, so I might need to drop that back a tiny bit more. I don't want to mess around too much with the saturation because we do get a very washed out looking effect when it gets bright. I'm kind of pleased with how this color grade is working. It's quite blue there. Now the last thing we need to do is export this video. We come up to File, Export, as we usually would if we were doing any sort of photo. We're just going to give it a custom text, so I'm just going to call it sailing. Select where you want it to be put, so come down and make sure that it's on H.264, and then you just click export and it will start to render it out and export it, and it'll be there ready for you to upload and do whatever you want with in the future. So that is how you can color grade your video on Lightroom. That's how we got the video effect color grade for this video. Now if you want to see any more future color grading videos, I know a lot of you guys were really interested. If you haven't seen this video on how to edit like Brandon Wolfall, this is another color grading tutorial we have done, so go check that out. So if you want to see any more color grading tutorials, don't forget to just leave a comment down below and we'll be sure to do that if you want. In the meantime, live long and prosper.